Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lion's Den. This is the Weekly Roar. It's great to have you back this week in the Lion's Den. Last week, I spoke about an important role that leaders must take on if they want to be successful, and that was the role of a coach. Developing your coaching skills will help strengthen your followers and their confidence and their trust in you. But this week, I'm shifting gears to a subject that might sound obvious, but sometimes it isn't, and it can make the difference between being a good leader and a great one. Want to know what one of the secrets to being a great leader is? You won't be surprised if I told you it was developing your ability to listen. Why is something so simple so critical to leadership? I'll tell you all about it today on the Weekly Roar. Before we jump into that, my name is Greg Storch, owner of Lion Enterprise, host of the Weekly Roar, and the founder of a worldwide bartered coaching program called The Helping Hand. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Now, if you want to catch more of the Weekly Roar, you can find all of my video resources on my website at lion-enterprise.com. Go to the Lion's Pride Library and check them all out. Okay, let's talk about the leader as a listener. I probably shouldn't say this, but my wife will be the first person to tell you that I have selective hearing. We'll be sitting on the couch talking, and my mind sometimes drifts away, and I'll have to ask what she said a couple of times by the end of the conversation. You could probably take that as a lesson in how not to listen as a leader. As Stephen Covey shared with us, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Good leaders are good communicators, but communication has two functions: speaking and listening. There's a lot of leaders who have no problem with the first part, but when it comes to listening, they don't do as well. Listening is one of the most important elements in communication. Leaders who are perceived as being good listeners have an easier time influencing those they lead. Maybe the reason why not all leaders are good listeners is that they don't understand that there are really two sides to listening. First, we have to be willing to take the time to listen to what others have to say, whether that's listening to their concerns or getting their feedback and input on things from operations to even conflict. Now, that's the easy part that I think we all get. Someone speaks and we keep our mouths closed and we listen to what's being said. Fair enough. But the second part of the equation is that listening also requires that leaders display an understanding to the person who's speaking. That means we have to commit to hearing what is being said so we can accurately convey what's being said back to the person. If you want to assess how well you're hearing what others are saying, how good of a job that you're doing at listening, quiz yourself. Do you devote your attention to conversations, or do you get distracted? Do you find your mind wandering while the other person's talking? Are you listening to what's being said, or are you busy judging what's being said? Are you asking questions to make sure you're hearing what the other person is saying? You know, when I'm meeting with a soldier to speak about their plans for transition, I have to exhibit good communication skills because I have to work with them to develop a plan that gives them the best chances for a successful transition. And many times when they're finished sharing their plan, I'll simply say something like, "What I hear you saying is," XYZ. Now that gives them the chance to acknowledge and validate that I have received the message that they are trying to convey to me. It also gives them a chance to correct anything that I may have misunderstood. So why exactly is listening so important for leaders to get good at doing? Well, first of all, it helps us to expand our leadership capacity. It's a way for us to learn from those around us. Yes, even our direct reports. See, effective listening gives us knowledge and perspectives that we don't already have. That helps us make informed decisions. Having the ability to listen to feedback and ideas that are different from our own helps us to grow. And when we grow in our leadership, we increase our leadership capacity. Listening is also a great way to show others that you care. People who enter my office each day see a quote from Roosevelt stuck on the wall behind me that says, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." Really listening to someone shows you care about what they're saying and empathize with their feelings. That helps improve your EQ as a leader, and it also creates an environment based on trust. Now, if you want to influence others, show them how much you care by getting better at listening to what they have to say. And probably one of the biggest benefits to listening is that it does wonders for giving you a dose of reality of what's happening on the ground. When those we lead see us as listeners, they feel open to sharing everything. Listening to what they have to say gives us knowledge and insights into the day-to-day reality of what's happening in the company, with your customers, and amongst all the employees. It's essential that we create an environment of trust and encourage our coworkers to speak openly about their daily challenges. You might be surprised at how different their reality is from your own. So let's do a pulse check here. I'm going to describe 3 different levels of listening, and I want you to honestly assess where you fall amongst these 3. Maybe it's a little sprinkling of all 3. Maybe it's all of one and none of the others. I don't know, but let's do an assessment and see where you might need to do better. Now, this first one, it's the worst. Even though it is a level of listening, it's actually not listening at all. So listen, we're all guilty of this at some point or another. So if this describes you a little bit, then you know you have some work to do in the active listening department. So here it is. When you're engaged in a conversation and the other person starts speaking, do you half listen? You might sit there and just nod every time now and then to make them think you're engaged. But what's really going on is that your inner dialogue is taking over and stealing your focus. Maybe you keep looking over at your phone, or you start thinking about what's coming up next in your day while the person's talking to you. Now, that's referred to as internal listening, and it's a sign of bad leadership. Now, if you engage in this level of listening, what's going to happen is that the people you lead will feel like you don't understand or you don't care about them. And that includes your family and your friends too. So is that you? Is it you sometimes? Even if it happens regularly enough to notice it, you've got some work to do here. Okay, so what about this one? See if you're at this level. Now, this time you're engaged in a conversation and you aren't actually preoccupied with other thoughts or looking down at your phone. But now you're focusing your attention on what you think the other person is trying to say, trying to decipher that message that they're trying to send to you, right? You probably hear the words that are coming out of their mouths, but you aren't fully connecting with the energy or the emotion that's behind what they're saying. Now, the person's going to feel like they're heard, but not so much understood. So if this is you, then you've got some work to do to help raise your EQ by getting better at listening. Or maybe you're this last one. During a conversation, you focus not only what's being said, but also what's not being said. That's what we call active listening. When we engage in active listening, we not only get the verbal cues, but we key in on body language and other nonverbal cues. That helps us to make an assessment of the other person's emotional state, which provides the clues we need to determine which things we could bring up and, more importantly, which things we might want to avoid. That, my friends, contributes directly to our EQ as leaders. So if you want to be a better leader, a better parent, a better neighbor, a better friend, a better whatever, then get better at being an active listener. Here's some tips on how you can do just that. Remember, we weren't born great listeners. It's a skill that we have to develop. It's safe to say that we were all raised to listen with the intent of responding. So the first thing we have to work on, myself included, is shifting our focus to understanding what others are trying to say. We can do that by not only listening to their words, but observing their nonverbal cues as well, and never, ever interrupt someone while they're talking. Now, how many of you struggle with eye contact? Well, practice makes perfect. That's another way to get better at active listening. What happens when we make eye contact is that we increase people's trust in us. And you should already know how essential trust is for others to feel safe. And when someone feels safe, they open up and share their ideas, their opinions, and their perspectives. Now, this next one is where last week's topic about coaching comes in. Good listeners know how to ask the right questions. Now, a lot of this comes from the skills developed through coaching. Effective listeners pay attention to what others are saying and not saying, and then they link it to the bigger picture. They don't ask close-ended questions that are answered with a simple yes or no. As I said last week, effective questionings begin with what, how, when, or why. Listening is a required skill of a good coach and a good leader. Instead of barking orders and telling people what to do, giving them their solutions, try asking questions that make them reflect. Sometimes it turns into a win-win because if we do it correctly, if we ask the right questions, we may help them unlock a solution that we didn't even think of ourselves. And then one last tip I'm going to give you is about the art of reflection. Now, this isn't your own reflection, but it's being a mirror for those who are speaking to you. Now, this requires empathy. See, when we see the situation through the eyes of others, we can imagine the kind of emotions they might be experiencing or thoughts that they might have. You can show your level of understanding by simply reflecting back to them what they've just said to you. Yeah, just repeat what they've said in your own words. That also gives us the opportunity to make sure we heard them correctly. Then acknowledge the feeling you heard by saying something like, wow, that must have been really stressful. Get it right, and the person talking to you will know that you're really listening to what they have to say. Good leaders are good listeners. They're active listeners. Now, luckily, listening is a skill that can be learned. Good leaders practice effective listening daily to help build their relationships, to gain insights, and to get new ideas, to communicate respect, warmth, and positivity. It's actually how they actually connect with others. Remember this: leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. You know, one of the greatest sports coaches of all times and a leader in his own right, John Wooden, said, "I believe one of the requirements of good leadership is the ability to listen, really listen to those in your organization. An effective leader is very good at listening, and it's difficult to listen when you're talking." Well, I couldn't have said it any better myself. So there you have it. I hope you heard what I had to say today. See what I did there? All right, everyone, that does it for me. Another micro lesson in leadership: why becoming a good listener helps you to become a better leader. Thank you all for supporting me and joining me in the Lion's Den. If you want to keep running to the roar, then join me again next week. All you have to do is just come on back to the Lion's Den next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Till we meet again, remember, be powerful, but stay poised, just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.